Welcome to the Trust Psyche podcast
on archetypal astrology and depth psychology.
I'm Jessica DiRuzza, MFT, and I'm a psychotherapist, astrologer, and teacher. I have an online psychotherapy practice that includes astrology with individuals and couples. I also offer supervision and consultation to therapists.
And I'm Travis DiRuzza, PhD. I'm a scholar, astrologer, teacher, and counselor. I offer astrology readings, astrological mentoring, and counseling. Together, for over a decade, we run the Trust Psyche School of Astrology and Depth Psychology.
We have online, on-demand astrology courses for all levels, from brand new beginner to professional astrologers and therapists.
You can find us at trustpsyche.com, where you can enter your email address to receive all our videos, podcasts, articles, and events to your inbox.
Follow us on Instagram at trust.psyche and on our YouTube channel, Trust Psyche.
We love creating cosmic content for you.
Thanks so much for being here with us. We hope you enjoy this episode. I want to talk today about sacrifice and its connection with Saturn and Neptune. We are in the heart of the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, which began in April of 2024 and has gotten very strong. I would say saturated, pervasive. We are swimming in these waters. 2025, 2026, and then the world transit wanes or kind of dissipates in its strength and potency in the remaining 6 months into April of 2027. My husband Travis and I just gave a 3-hour talk on this alignment called Where is the Line? It was open to the public, and we shared one facet of Saturn-Neptune. It was a beautiful ritual that took place under the total solar eclipse on September 21st. We're going to make that video available on our YouTube channel, so for those of you who would like to watch it, you can go there as soon as it's released here in the coming days. But kind of what happens for me is once we start on a thread of a certain archetypal combination, the floodgates open and my process begins to refine and distill into other facets of the alignment. And so I want to focus on the archetype of sacrifice today. And this is something that I think is really difficult to talk about because it pretty quickly can lead into being ideological, ungrounded, not truly honoring the loss and the pain and the suffering that goes into sacrifice. It's really not something that we can take lightly. And yet, it's also important to me that we're not scary and fearful when we talk about these things. I don't ever want anyone leaving more afraid. I want people leaving empowered and inspired, but also like more real, more human. And I think that's a very strong component of the Saturn-Neptune, is really being human. And I want to actually start with a story about sacrifice because I think story is a powerful way to illustrate these archetypes. So at the beginning of the Saturn-Neptune transit, Travis and I got pregnant with our second child, our son, Moby. And on August 2nd of 2024, our home flooded. There was torrential rains, and We live around a pond at sea level, and the rains flooded the pond, and the groundwater came up, and it came into our home. It was 5 a.m, and it was terrifying because not only was I pregnant, but we also have our daughter, Luce, who at the time was 3. And we woke up to her screaming because she was the first one to realize that the home was flooding. And we obviously made it out of that experience thanks to a neighbor who had a Jeep, came over and got us from the bed that we were sitting on as the water rose. You get terrified of so many things: getting electrocuted, losing all your possessions, scrambling to make sure you have the things that are essential just to get through. And, you know, at the time on the Barrier Reef Island that we live on in the Gulf of Mexico, there was only a very small handful of people whose homes flooded. This is kind of a classic Saturn-Neptune thing, and it's not the first time our home is flooded. Back in 2016, we were living in Berkeley, California, and there were torrential rains at the time, and we were living in an old horse stable and on the bottom floor. And throughout that year, every time it would rain, our home would flood. But we were renting at the time, and the landlord really wanted us not to live there anymore because they wanted to sell the property to turn it into condos. But that's illegal for housing rights in Berkeley. Yay, progressive politics in California. And so our home flooded, and they didn't do anything to fix it. And so mold started to grow. This is also a Saturn-Neptune thing. So some real issues with water being in places that it shouldn't be, and that causing destruction. And we lost, at that time, so many of our possessions. But what we ended up doing was that deluge brought us to Florida. So we packed up what we had left, which was Travis's upright base, which took most of the car. We'd drive a Prius hatchback, right? And we had this huge obsidian that probably weighs over 50 pounds that we found in our yard because we lived on a fault line where the volcanic rock came up from the core. Travis found it at the base of a redwood tree one day. And some remaining books and our clothes. And that was it. That's all we had. And we drove across the United States, 3,000 miles from California to Florida. Felt like, you know, our version of Noah's Ark. And we started life over. It actually was because of that flood that the landlords had to give us a large payout, which ended up allowing us to afford putting a down payment on a home. Now, I'm someone, I didn't know if I was ever going to be able to own a home. I don't come from money. I grew up in a low socioeconomic status, and so it was very surprising to me. So we bought this home shortly after we got married in 2018. And during that time, I was going through a transit of the first flood in Berkeley of Neptune-Saturn. And it was the last quadrature of Saturn-Neptune. So I had already been through an archetypal imprint of what a flood can do to your life. And the Saturnian loss of so much. And I'm not someone who's particularly attached to my possessions. I really don't have very much fixed energy in my chart. The only fixed thing I have is Pluto and Scorpio in the 8th house. So not very fixed in the sense of the physical material world. So if anybody was going to lose some physical possessions in their home, you know, I'm probably like constitutionally the best well suited for that. However, the profound loss of everything that went with having to leave our home in Berkeley at the time, the loss of community and a decade of living in the Bay Area, and all of the roots, the Saturn roots that had been put in there. But it was so clear to us at the time that the Neptunian signs and messages that were coming through was saying it was time to leave, that chapter was over. It was very legible to both Travis and I. There was agreement on that. And so here you see this very dynamic interplay of Saturn and Neptune, of the loss and then the meaning that was coming through, like these meaningful messages that were guiding us to something else. So fast forward to 2024, I'm pregnant, the flood happens, and I immediately had faith, because at the last Saturn-Neptune in the world transit, I had already been through a version of this. However, this time it was more devastating because we own our home. I was pregnant. The last thing you want to do is uproot your 3-year-old and your pregnant self and be displaced. Another Saturn-Neptune thing. Displacement. So it was tragic. It was extremely hard. It was very vulnerable. But I had faith. We had faith. What I didn't expect was for there to be another hurricane 1 month later, 6 weeks later, where the entire Barrier Reef Island of approximately 3,000 people flooded from the ocean, rising and coming in 6 feet. So what that meant was that the construction workers and contractors who were building our home, their homes also flooded. Everyone's homes were flooded. So the demand of the Saturnian materials that were needed to rebuild were in very short supply, and there was a feeling of emergency. And we had already started rebuilding our home. I'll be transparent here. It cost $350,000 to rebuild. Thank God we had insurance, because we have a mortgage on our home. If you have a mortgage on your home here where we live in the state of Florida, then you have insurance that covers the loss if there's a flood. Many of my neighbors own their home. They've been here for a long time, generations back, and didn't have insurance. And to this day, half of the people in my neighborhood no longer live here because they couldn't rebuild. Here we are 1 year later, the next eclipse season from the one where those hurricanes happen, and we lose everything all over again. Now we have that component of Saturn and Neptune, which can relate to like this feeling of PTSD, because you've already been through something traumatizing. There's a tragedy, and your nervous system hasn't healed from it. You don't feel safe yet. You're in a state of survival, fight or flight, fawn or freeze, right? This happens with Saturn, Neptune. And it creates all kinds of things, including dysregulation, hypervigilance. You're traumatized. I mean, there really can be, with this aspect of sacrifice, being traumatized. And here we are. We've lost everything for a second time over. 10 days after that, one of the largest hurricanes on record comes directly on top of our house. This one, the eye of the hurricane, literally over our home. Total devastation. 1, 2, 3. Unprecedented, historical, nothing ever like it. to endure all of that while 6 months pregnant with a 3-year-old with high support needs. My daughter's autistic. And it's like, oh my God, our whole life is upended. And yet I knew deep down that this baby inside of my belly was going to be an incredible soul. That he was a triple hurricane rider. That he was the great white whale. That there was a deep wisdom in his soul. And I knew that because of the magnitude of the loss. And now I understand that this doesn't always play out, and we have to be really careful of spiritually bypassing, especially with Saturn-Neptune. But there was just this deep maternal knowing that everything was going to be okay, and that this soul that was coming to join our family was going to be a magical creature filled with so much love and exuberance to be here because of the sacrifices that we were going through. And I knew there was going to be something greater on the other side because of the level of loss. And this is the really important part of the word sacrifice, which means to make sacred. Is you're giving up something valuable and important or pleasurable for the sake of someone you care about. For example, a parent sacrificing sleep for their child. It's a worthy sacrifice. So psychologically we sacrifice. It means that it's a symbol of letting go of egoic desires, comfort or control in service of growth, love, or a deeper purpose. It's the willingness to endure loss, pain, or limitation in order to gain transformation, integrity, or wholeness. And archetypally, it often represents the principle that something must die so that new life can come in. So that something that dies can either be an old pattern, a belief, a stage of life. But it's the archetype of transformation through loss and offering. In myths, rituals, and depth psychology, sacrifice often means something has to be given up so something greater can emerge. Giving up an old identity, a habit, a defense mechanism, in order for a more authentic self to develop. So when I was pregnant, I was fully aware of the sacrifice that every mother goes through bringing life into this world. We give up almost everything. We give up our bodies. We give up the ability to eat and drink whatever we want. We give up our comfort. We give up mobility. We give up our youth. There's so much that we sacrifice in the act of bringing life in. So that is already central in the process of giving birth. However, when at the same time there's a Saturn-Neptune conjunction in the sky, and you tend to be someone who front loads your transits like I do, to also then lose my home and everything else at the same time and be displaced at a moment where all you want is to be cozy and secure and safe, all the great things of Saturn. It was like the ultimate sacrifice. And I was acutely aware of this. And it's what allowed me to maintain my faith and my hope and my belief, all the positive sides of Neptune, through the tragedy and the hardship. And on top of that, I knew that I was going to be giving birth to a soul whose birth chart had Saturn and Neptune conjunct in it. I was going to be giving birth to a birth chart of Saturn-Neptune. Just like I had given birth with my daughter Luce to a birth chart of the Saturn-Pluto conjunction of 2020 in the heart of the pandemic, also with Jupiter there in the triple conjunction in Capricorn. So, two of the most major outer planetary alignments of our time, the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, I give birth in the pandemic, and then the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, for me personally, give birth after 3 hurricanes. Yeah, that's the magnitude here of not only what we've been through, but what the collective is going through and what each of you are going through in your own unique versions and iterations of this alignment. So, sacrifice and love, true love almost always involves sacrifice of time, of attention, of ego gratification. Parents, partner, friends, and communities make sacrifices so relationships can thrive. Of course, archetypally, this very much connects with the image of the wounded healer or the Christ figure, the sacrifice for the well-being of others. Sacrifice in the ego shows us that surrendering the ego's control to something larger, the unconscious, the self, God, or life itself. Or as Jung said, that individuation requires sacrifice. Of illusions, Neptune, of attachments, Saturn, or ways of being that no longer serve. In myths across cultures, heroes and heroines are asked to sacrifice something precious. Their safety, their possessions, or even loved ones. This is the part where we can't take it lightly. And it's difficult to talk about because it could so easily become, again, ideological or spiritual bypassing here. To lose a loved one, to lose your safety or your possessions, this is real life shit. It's scary. It's terrifying. There's an aspect of Saturn-Neptune that relates to the theme of terror, of distress, of angst and agony, of unrest, a crisis. High anxiety. All those things accompany sacrifice. All of those things where you feel at times like you have lost yourself, you've lost your mind, you've lost your sanity, right? Saturn-Neptune is that interplay between sanity and insanity. It's that tension of the known and the unknown and deep uncertainty. There's no way around that during Saturn-Neptune. There's no way around deep uncertainty about whatever it is that you are facing in your own process of the journey through sacrifice of this time. And that's going to look different for each of us. But without doubt, there is sacrifice. And to me, this is the journey of sacrifice, the before, the during, and the after. And the endurance spiritually that it takes to maintain an overall place of faith in our darkest times. So sacrifice tests our devotion and opens the way to initiation and transformation. The shadow side of sacrifice can become a kind of distorted version of self-denial, martyrdom, or people-pleasing. And that's when it becomes destructive rather than transformative. The healthy form of sacrifice is conscious and chosen, and this part is really important, that it's a choice. because then and only then can it ultimately be turned into a gift instead of a compulsion that leads to burnout, disconnection from self, from source, from one another, from the divine. So like a version of this, and down to earth version, like a healthy sacrifice would be a parent waking up at 3 a.m. for their newborn who needs to eat every 2 to 3 hours. You give up your own sleep for the child's well-being, right? It's a choice that you make out of love. An unhealthy sacrifice is always giving up one's own needs, dreams, or voice in order to keep the peace. That is less of a true sacrifice and more about self-erasure. Another version of this we could see is like healthy sacrifice would be a student sacrificing short-term fun to study for a degree that aligns with their calling. But an unhealthy sacrifice would be burning out, working endless hours, sacrificing your health and your relationships because of a pressure to succeed or a fear of failure. This runs so deep, and it's such a core theme of the Saturn-Neptune alignment. I want to make a bridge here between the archetype of sacrifice, the journey of sacrifice, and grief. Grief is essentially the motor process through which we journey through sacrifice. Because sacrifice entails loss, letting go, there is inherently woven into it grief. We must mourn the old, the past, what was, what has been. We must grieve it. We must cry. We must be in our process around it. So anytime we are sacrificing something, whether by choice or by circumstance, grief arises. We grieve the loss of what was, a role, a dream, a loved one, a way of being, even something like, our home, our community, so that eventually something new can come into form. So grief is the emotional process of metabolizing loss. It's how our body, our psyche, and our soul register that something or someone we love is gone and life will not be the same. So grief is both pain and love at once, and we grieve because we have loved. In psychology and myth, grief often acts as the rite of passage following sacrifice. A child sacrifices the innocence of childhood when growing up, and grief surfaces as nostalgia, a key Saturn-Neptune theme, and a longing or even a rebellion. So healthy grief allows yourself to feel, to mourn, and to honor what has been lost. And this integrates the loss into your life and makes space for renewal, the other side of Saturn-Neptune. The manifestation and incarnation of the new reality, or the new consciousness, or the new life. Unhealthy grief is denying, suppressing, or rushing the grief. I see this a lot in my practice as a psychotherapist, where there's either the denial or the suppression. Oh, no, that doesn't bother me, or I'm not feeling anything there. Or rushing the grief, trying to force it, trying to make oneself just get over it already. This leaves it unresolved, and sometimes that then can turn into depression, bitterness, or numbness, resentment, anger. Those are some clues that the grief hasn't been metabolized yet. I think of it as when we don't shed the tears that purify the soul, we become frozen or locked in time. So when we are stuck, when we're paralyzed, when we feel frozen, usually there's a thawing of feelings that need to be felt in order for the grief to be metabolized and be the rite of passage into whatever the next phase or cycle of life is. And Saturn-Neptune time periods require us to go through that process. Again, there's no way around that. So sacrifice is the act of giving up, and grief is the process of letting go, and together they open the way for the renewal of new life. So our son, Mobius Michael, was born on February 2nd, and what an incredible birth. 64 hours. That's right. You heard that correctly. 64 hours of labor. And he was born at the most perfect moment, divine timing. And I think every child brings in kind of key messages for us when we can really tune in and listen to their soul. And I will say this, Moby is exuberantly happy to be here on Earth. He loves being alive. He loves incarnation. His spirit is so full. His chalice is full of a spiritus. And he is the most joyful being. And he's at peace. And the magnitude of the sacrifice that our family went through is definitely seen in the magnitude of who this being is that's come to grace and bless our lives in so many ways that are deeply personal to us and sacred. And this is the beautiful side of Saturn-Neptune, is grace and the sacred. Saturn-Neptune, we can really doubt ourselves under it. We can feel confused. We can feel like we're in a fog. I've described it as at times being swept away at sea, lost at sea, losing your bearings, not losing sight of land, not knowing how to get back. It can also sometimes feel like you're in quicksand. It can feel like you're in molasses. Things can be kind of moving in slow motion. At times it can feel untenable and unbearable. Like you can't take anymore. But it's also mercy. It's the grace that comes in despite our losses and imperfections. This is our humanity piece with Saturn. Grace can arrive as the unexpected fruit of the letting go, of the sacrifice. Within grief, grace often appears in the heart of the grief, those small moments of beauty, kindness, or connection that remind us life is worth living. So like in mourning, someone may feel sudden gratitude for the love they shared, a grace within the pain. And grace is often what carries us through the threshold after sacrifice and grief. It is the mystery of renewal when life returns in a new form. It's the resurrection after death, the dawn after the dark night, the spring after winter. In the psychology, grace can often feel like the capital S self in Jung's terms for wholeness of the psyche, sending us symbols, dreams, or synchronicities just when we need them, just in the nick of time. When we're at our rock bottom, when we're bent on our knees, when we're in the fetal position, we can't take anymore, and then boom, grace comes. My children are my grace. My family. When you lose your home and everything you own, it becomes crystal clear that all that really matters is love and the people in your life. The people that you love and that you're connected to. And the immense gratitude for those relationships. You know, it's like Saturn-Neptune, everything falls away and you see what remains. It's also a time where you really see what you're made of spiritually, because it really can be the dark night that one goes through, and it tests your faith in so many different ways, and easily can lead into disconnection from self, from source, from life, from people, that when you return to your faith and your connection to everything, it's like there's a sense of, I don't know how to describe it, a pride that you made it through, knowing what it took, and knowing that maybe nobody else will fully ever know, or just one or two other people. And I don't know, you can like hold your head up high that you endured what you endured, and you can see the blessings and the gifts that came out of it that are incredibly precious. Yeah, so sacrifice and how we live through it, I think, plays out very strongly in our experience of Saturn-Neptune alignments that we go through. And the thing about a world transit that's different than a personal transit is every single person on the planet is going through that archetypal combination. And that's a huge part of what leads to the pervasiveness and the saturation of that archetypal signature, is because it's not just you that's going through it. It's every single person. It's the 8 billion people on planet Earth. And it's everywhere you look. It's in every person's life. It's in the world. And I think the thing about talking about Saturn-Neptune, which I'm probably going to do a lot until the transit's over, is there's just so many different facets of it. It's infinite. It's endless. And you'll see that if you watch our talk on it, Where's the Line, that Travis and I did. It's like there's so many versions of it. It's like a endless well that you can dive into. And I do think Pharmacon plays a really deep role in our embodiment around the sacrifices that we lived through. Like how we relate to the loss and the pain and the suffering, and our ability to be with it and to hold it and to feel it versus not, directly plays into, I think, the quality of our life, and more so the quality of our consciousness. And this piece of Saturn-Neptune that can relate to this like spiritual maturation, or this maturation of our consciousness, usually happens through some kind of deprivation that we go through. Like, I feel more here than I ever have. I think in part that has to do with the feeling of completion with my family, which is huge, I think, for any person who decides to be a mother. Like, until you bring the souls to planet Earth and like they arrive Earthside, I know for me there was just a sense of anxiety until that was complete. And there's this renewal for me on the other side of like who I am, and I'm changing a lot. You know, with my first child, I lost myself completely. There was some very profound Saturn-Pluto healing that had to take place for me. It was square my moon, and it was just so deep, so ancestral. It took all of me, you know? There are moments I felt like I wasn't going to make it. Very extreme. But this time with my second child, I didn't lose myself. I regained myself. And it's still a mystery. I'm still a mystery to myself and what's happening now for me. I'm changing, and I don't quite yet know where it's going. And I have to remind myself to trust it because of the uncertainty. I think it says a lot about our character and our ability to be with uncertainty. Some people get really scary when they're uncertain. Sometimes I slip into that for moments, and then I'm reminded to best take care of myself and the ones around me. It doesn't serve to get scary. It also doesn't serve to get controlling either. That doesn't serve. It's a false way of being. And so I think I'll end with this, that I think the Saturn-Neptune is this pretty daily reminder that it's a choice that we get to make about how we show up in this life for ourselves and our loved ones. And it has a lot to do, I think, with integrity and the sense of right relation. Doing right by ourselves and doing right by those around us. And that is a very complex and nuanced process that requires us to slow down and tune in. And I think out of all the astrological alignments, Saturn-Neptune really requires us to slow down and tune in to what is right for us. What is spiritually integral for us. And that's going to be different for every person, given wherever you're at in the journey, in your life story, the hand that you've been dealt, the place that you see yourself in now, the place that you want to be in. But I do know what we share in this journey is that we are human beings who get to wake up and make a choice to try our best to know better and do better. I messed up several times this week. And it was hard to see. And I had to apologize. I still think I have to apologize. Even again, more. Because I made mistakes. I misstepped. And we have to slow down to be able to catch those missteps. And we live in a world where you're expected to move very quickly, or otherwise you're behind. And that's a dangerous narrative, because it leads us all not only being exhausted and fatigued and worn out, but you can't think clearly. And you can't tune in to yourself, to your higher self, to the moment, to the people around you, to what's needed right now for you, uniquely, in your situation, in your set of circumstances. There's no one size fits all. But when you live in a world of sound bites and constant speed, you lose yourself. You don't know who you are. You don't know what you need or what you want. And when that happens, you start acting funny and are more prone to causing harm. And it requires such a deep listening, because we can each have our beliefs and ideologies, even messages that we think we're receiving from the universe in a myriad of ways. But at the end of the day, it has to land in some version of consensus reality with the people around you and the world around you. I'll end with this. As a psychotherapist, I work with all kinds of people. I've been doing this long enough that I've worked with every political association, Democrat, Republican, Independent, Progressive. I've worked with people who are deep into QAnon. I've worked with just about every religion, every sexual identity and orientation. And it's a pleasure and it's an honor to support people with wherever they're at in their journey. And I love it so much. And I am my own person with my own compass and orientation and set of beliefs that in no way cancels anybody else out, but also nobody else cancels me out. And so from my journey and my experience, where I've come to so far at the age of 38, is I am a democratic socialist who believes every human being has the right to exist as they are, deserves to have housing and food and education and healthcare no matter what, no matter who they are, whether or not they work, whether or not society deems them, whatever they deem. I believe in universal health care and education. I believe in the right to opt out of it if you don't want to participate. And I also believe in public health, and that we have an ethical responsibility and a moral responsibility to one another. That I have my own personal rights as a human being, and then there's the intersection of us living in a society. And so I am pro-science and pro-medicine. I believe in vaccines for public safety and health. I believe they are safe and effective for the majority of people. I believe that it is my duty as a citizen to keep myself as healthy as possible so that everyone else can be as healthy as possible. I also believe in reproductive rights. And as someone who went through the birth process, I believe in pro-choice. Currently, where I've landed with that is I think most people, unless it's medically necessary, probably should know by 12 weeks what their decision is. But I understand at times the lack of knowing or access. And so I think really by 14 weeks, the majority of women should know, or persons should know whether or not they're going to keep the child. I think there should be a limit to the time that you can have an elective miscarriage. But you should have the choice to do that. I also believe that billionaires should not exist. I think it's amoral, and I think it's destructive and not sustainable. I believe in free speech. I believe that every person deserves the right to worship in the way that they want to, as long as it does not cause harm to anybody else. I fully support the LGBTQIA+ community. I stand with the queer community. I stand with the trans community. I also believe that every human being should have the accommodations and support that they need to live a high quality of life. I believe the neurodivergent community deserves our support instead of our judgment or condemnation. I believe that unless you are neurodivergent, you need to step back and let those voices speak and listen to them about what they need. And that there is no shame for any human being needing the support and help that they need to live a good quality of life, irrespective of what that is. I am also very much someone who believes in medicine and the benefits of medication support when needed. Up until 200 years ago, 50% of women died in childbirth. Children did not live. 50% of children did not live past the age of 5. So in our ancestral knowing, just not that many generations back, we were dying in birth. We were dying in childhood of disease. Modern medicine and science is one of the human being's greatest accomplishments, and I believe it deserves our respect. I believe the experts should be listened to. I do my best to listen to them. I do my best to be a critical thinker and at the same time listen to those who have sacrificed their lives to learn what they have learned, to be public servants. And I think that's really important in the age of misinformation and disinformation. I think it's really, really important. And I thought it was important that you knew that I thought that way. I take a stand, but I do so in a way at my best that doesn't cancel others out. I love you. I support you being you. And I thank you for being here with me. We are dreamed into existence.
What we do with that dream is up to us.
How we dream is as important as what we dream.
For the what of the dream knows itself through the how.